The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of the most infamous yet critically acclaimed slasher movies ever made. Just don't bring up its many subpar sequels and reboots, as this only applies to the 1974 original. Because no matter how much they may try, none of them have ever been able to duplicate or take away from how great the first film really is. It's so well regarded, in fact, that Quentin Tarantino himself has gone on record as calling it a perfect movie. And today, I'd like to go over what exactly Tarantino meant when he said that and why it's a surprisingly accurate way to describe the movie. And there will be major spoilers ahead, so in case you haven't seen the film yet but plan to, please don't proceed any further. This will be the only spoiler warning I'll be giving out. Okay, so just to get the obvious out of the way first, obviously the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is not a perfect movie in the literal sense of the word. Just by the title alone, one would know that this film is not for everyone, and the way it just sinks into complete and total moral depravity and insanity isn't something that appeals to many people. So what Tarantino actually meant, or at least what my interpretation of what he meant, as keep in mind I'm no film expert here, so you can take or leave what I'm about to say as you wish, is that it's perfect in the sense that it's both exactly what it wants to be and accomplishes everything that it sets out to do. And if a movie, any movie, can achieve that on the same level as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, then it is indeed a perfect film. Because simply put, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a film that sets out to terrify its audience through mind games and a creepy atmosphere rather than what's actually being shown on screen, and that's what makes it stand up so well against many later slasher films that this one would ironically inspire. Because from the very beginning, something about the world that the characters inhabit just doesn't seem quite right, almost having a bit of the first Mad Max's proto-apocalypse or on the brink of the end kind of feeling, where civilization still exists, but is on the verge of falling apart. And as the characters go on to encounter Leatherface and his cannibalistic family, the film only sinks deeper into this disturbing atmosphere until the infamous dinner scene, where anything resembling normalcy flies right out the window and everything sinks down into the deepest recesses of depravity that could only exist inside the mind of an insane killer, with Tobe Hooper actually managing to capture the essence of that feeling and put it on screen for the audience to experience too. And what makes all of this even more impressive is, all of it is completely realistic. And as I noted in another video, which you can find a link in the description to, there definitely is a time and place for realism in stories. And this movie was one time where it was better off embracing that. There's no monsters or supernatural creatures here, just a family of insane killers taunting their latest victim, showing just how horrible, depraved, and scary an ordinary human being can really be, and by simply portraying human nature at its absolute worst and the horror that comes with it, Tobe Hooper takes something that could totally happen in real life and makes it feel almost surreal in the way it presents that terror, which is a feat that very few other movies have been able to achieve. But unlike his next movie, Eaten Alive, where he arguably embraces this too much and causes the setting to feel more like a surreal nightmare rather than reality, here he manages the perfect ratio of realism to depravity so that everything feels both plausible yet insanity incarnate at the same time. But the point here is, this is a movie that wants to show humanity at its most evil and insane, and most definitely accomplishes that task by presenting things to the viewer through the same perverted mindset as the killers, and the results are a degradation of everything the viewer knows until both they and Sally find themselves going just as insane as they are. And just to drive this point home even further, the movie draws up constant imagery and references to a butcher who must kill prepare cattle in order to survive, and then puts Leatherface in the role of the butcher and the teenagers in the role of the cattle, which only makes the horror, insanity, and surreal terror that the movie manages to evoke even more disturbing. And what also helps is in the way it presents these scares, as it doesn't really go for the typical scare chord or rely heavily on gallons and gallons of blood. Honestly, this is a horror movie that operates on an almost completely different level than any made before or since, because not only does it not go out of its way to use violence to terrify the viewer, but almost goes in the opposite direction and instead keeps most of the gore off screen and uses subtlety and little clues to let the viewer know what's happening, letting their imagination fill in the rest. And really, letting the audience paint their own mental picture in some of these scenes may just be the scariest thing about them, especially because when violence is actually shown on screen, it's presented very matter-of-factly most of the time, as if one were watching a documentary as opposed to a movie purposefully trying to scare them. And a great example of this is Kirk's death, as he walks into the house with an admittedly foreboding feel, but then out of nowhere, Leatherface whacks him in the head, causing him to fall to the floor convulsing uncontrollably, only to get hit again and go limp before he drags him off and shuts the door. It's all presented so fast and bluntly that it's frankly way more terrifying than if there was tense build-up, music, and plenty of blood and graphic cuts to accompany the hits. And as I noted before, that's what makes it a perfect film. It wants to do nothing but depict humanity at its least human and most depraved, and absolutely terrify the viewer while doing it, and does so with flying colors. And the fact that it makes no pretenses about any of this, and just dives headfirst right into what it wants to be, and doesn't stop until the final frame, is what makes it stand head and shoulders above its competition. Because simply put, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a good film. It may be absolutely depraved and horrifying to sit through, yes, but that's what it wants to be. And the fact that it accomplishes that flawlessly is what makes it so great. And where it succeeds on this front that most other slasher films don't is in its very simplicity. Because it doesn't rely on typical horror cliches in order to deliver its scares, and instead relies more on realism to deliver the goods, which arguably makes it more effective, as I just got through saying. And for another example of that, the movie doesn't waste half its runtime establishing the teenage characters just so they can be killed off. There's no bad boy or good girl that you know right off the bat will end up alive or dead or anything like that. They're all just presented as normal teenagers, with the only one who even has a distinct personality being Franklin. And similarly, slasher movies infamously rely on the characters making bad decisions in order to advance the plot. But as I noted in my video on another horror classic, The Shining, which you can also find a link in the description to, the best horror movies are the ones where the characters make smart decisions and things still turn out bad for them anyway, and this is no exception to that. Because just like the characters themselves, everything they do is realistic. You could picture any group of real-life teenagers doing everything that they do. And even when they make questionable decisions, it's all understandable ones. Like for example, when they see a young man hitchhiking, they decide to help him out, even if some of them think it's a bad idea. But the second the man is shown to be dangerous, they throw him out of the van and become really freaked out. Or when Kirk goes into the house, he's being a typical troublemaking teenager who has no reason to believe that there's anybody dangerous in there. Sure, he should have been more careful, but once again, he was just acting like a normal teenager. And once he goes missing, the characters all do the logical thing and go looking for him, only to encounter Leatherface as well, who they're understandably unprepared to deal with. In fact, Franklin even tells Sally that they shouldn't go looking for their friends in the dark, which she even agrees with, but end up doing so anyway because they feel they have no choice. And once again, the fact that these are all things the viewer could see real people doing, up to and including themselves, only makes what ends up happening even scarier. It easily gets in the viewer's mind and plays their paranoia like a fiddle, making the scares all the more effective. But where this might just apply most of all is in Leatherface himself. Because simply put, a giant hulking man wielding a hammer and chainsaw all the while wearing a mask made out of human flesh is indeed the stuff of nightmares, which makes his mere presence terrifying. But the genius of his character is that the movie doesn't embrace just how inherently scary he is and instead scales it back. Particularly in how it turns out that he isn't even the mastermind or source of the family's evil deeds, and is instead just a mentally disabled man who's completely subservient to the other members of his family. Now, one would think that seeing such a huge, chainsaw-wielding maniac whimpering and taking abuse from a man he could easily kill would completely take away from his fear factor and make him look pathetic, but it only serves to make the other members of his family look even worse, since even if they don't have his sheer strength or brutality, they're knowingly engaging in this stuff rather than simply going along with what the rest of the family is doing because that's all they've been subjected to. And though it probably wasn't intentional, it almost adds a tragic quality to Leatherface's character, because in the end, he's arguably just as much a victim of his family as the people he kills, since they clearly take advantage of his disabled state to use him for their own ends. And speaking of that, as I brought up in my video on the Terminator, which you can also find a link in the description to, one of the biggest problems slasher movies often have is that they overpower their villains too much to the point that it seemingly becomes impossible for them to be killed or stay dead. They're basically unstoppable killing machines, and when the movie is ostensibly about trying to stop said killer, it can take the viewer out of it when that task seems impossible. But just like with the aforementioned Terminator, this doesn't apply to Leatherface at all. This man is portrayed as 100% human, and what makes him such a threat is both that he's such a big and strong one, as well as his choice in weaponry. Because simply put, what's a petite teenage girl and a man in a wheelchair, for example, going to do against such a man? And the fact that he's wielding a chainsaw on top of that? But he's most definitely not unbeatable and has the natural limitations of a normal human being. And the fact that his family can instantly cow him into submission is only one example of that. Because he also visibly struggles a bit when carrying Pam, isn't the fastest runner, which makes even more sense when one considers he's also carrying a chainsaw, makes bad and impulsive decisions when angered, like destroying the door, actually gets scared by Sally when she screams in his face, and reacts completely realistically to both being clocked in the face with a wrench and cut with his own chainsaw. And these are all things you would ordinarily never see from a typical slasher movie villain. But instead of taking away from his fear factor, it only adds to it because he is only human, and yet is able to take out 4 of the 5 teenagers single-handedly, and comes pretty dang close to getting the 5th multiple times. It's the fact that he does have limitations and weaknesses, yet is such a threat in spite of them, that makes him so scary. And that's not even getting into the fact that both the hitchhiker and gas station owner are also clearly threats when they want to be, despite not being nearly as imposing as Leatherface. But again, the simple fact that they could completely dominate such a man already tells you everything you need to know about how terrible they are. But the fact that they're all clearly insane and unapologetically evil on top of that makes their mere presence bone-chilling as well. And all of this while being completely human with no fantastical powers to speak of. And as I noted at the start, that's what helps make the movie so scary. The fact that Leatherface and his family aren't some supernatural, unstoppable force, but rather just normal people that the main characters just happen to be weaker than. But this most definitely applies on the other end of the spectrum as well. Because the teenagers are also portrayed as completely human. As I even noted before, all of them die realistic deaths, and the sole holdout is a limping, bloody mess by the time it's over who just happens to get lucky. And unlike so many other slasher movies, she doesn't suddenly grow insanely tough and take down Leatherface in a one-on-one match. No, instead she gets away mostly because they got careless. The hitchhiker had plenty of chances to just kill her, but he decides to play games instead, giving her an opening which she takes advantage of. But even then, after he catches up with her, he still can't be bothered to just finish her off and instead toys with her some more, causing him to get run over since he's doing this in the middle of the freaking road. And from there, Sally is able to escape because now she has the help of a man who's more equipped to deal with the situation and is actually able to take down Leatherface just long enough for both of them to get away. And even then, it might not have turned out so well for either of them if the second driver hadn't showed up and gave Sally a lift, distracting Leatherface long enough for him to escape. And just like with everything else, what makes this ending so brilliant is that everything is portrayed here realistically. Everything is logically followed up on exactly the way it would in real life. Especially the fact that the hitchhiker chooses to tangle with Sally in the middle of the road instead of dragging her back to the house, and how it ends up backfiring on both him and Leatherface because it causes people driving on the road to become involved. And there's also that, as I mentioned before, the characters are actually very smart in how they handled the situation, and particularly the truck driver. Seriously, it's no wonder he's such a fan favorite with only a minute of screen time, since he's the only character to actually hurt any of the family members and actually lives to tell the tale and save Sally at the same time. But what only adds to the brilliance here is that despite everything that happens and the overall tone of the film I described before, the bad guys actually lose in the end. Because discounting the sequels and remakes, think about what the ending actually means. Sally actually got away and witnessed all of their horrible deeds up close and personally. Even if she's cackling like a lunatic and may have gone insane from the experience, there's no way that driver isn't taking her to a hospital where she'll have a lot of questions to answer. And even if she's too mentally broken to answer them, one also has to keep in mind that the truck driver got away too, and it's more than likely that at the first chance he gets, he's going to call the police and tell them about a maniac with a chainsaw that tried to kill him and a woman covered in blood, with his truck still being parked more or less directly across from their house. So no matter which way you look at it, the family is finished. The gas station owner is going to jail, and Leatherface will probably be thrown in an insane asylum or mental hospital, ensuring that their killing spree has ended for good. But given the nature of the film, it only makes sense that things wouldn't turn out good for anyone, yet not actually show this outcome and instead leave Leatherface's chainsaw dance to convey the foreboding of what will happen, just as everything else in the film has. Seriously, rather than show, don't tell, this film's motto is definitely imply, don't show. So through a combination of unabashed realism, a commitment to the insanity and depravity on display, and avoiding most of the pitfalls of other slasher movies, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre not only manages to be a unique horror movie, but perhaps one of the best ever made at that. As I've already said a few times, this is a film that scares its audience by getting in their head and trying to bring them down to the same level of insanity as the family, and the results are not pretty, but still brilliantly made all the same. And like I said at the start, that's what makes it a perfect movie. The fact that it's able to capture exactly what it wanted to be and committed to it without making any pretenses or attempts to disguise that. It's a movie that's one and only goal is to horrify the viewer, and considering it's still considered a masterpiece of horror, and perhaps one of the best and scariest the genre has to offer even to this day, it most definitely succeeded at that task and then some. Alright, I think I've more than made my point here. So now why don't you tell me? Do you believe that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of the best slasher movies ever made for any or all of the reasons I went over? Or do you think it's overrated and nothing but a disgusting indulgence of depravity? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. Because as I always say, you don't have to agree with any opinions expressed in this video if you don't want to. Movies can be very subjective, and what's terrifying to one person may be laughable to another. So if you think I had it all wrong, that is totally okay. And thank you all for watching. I greatly appreciate it. And I hope to see you all next time.